from beginning. Wonderful. Okay. So very quick introduction about me. So I'm a doctor of psychology, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been doing all kinds of different work in the field of domestic violence and trauma and abuse. I've worked in group homes. I've worked as a first responder with law enforcement, responding to crisis, critical incidents. I've worked at Kaiser. I've currently provide treatment and clinical supervision to therapists providing clinical care for domestic violence victims, domestic violence offenders, victims and offenders of child abuse. And so this is 20 years of collective experience that I believe are the most important topics. And I hope you have a handful of takeaways by the end of this training. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So the topic for today is trauma bonding, but I really want to begin by framing this training about what toxic bonding and toxic relationships are, and as a reminder, what they do for our health. So generally, I strongly believe this. I believe toxic / abusive relationships is that they are the public health issue of our lives. I cannot stress enough the impact, negative impact that happens in relating, whether it's parent-child, whether it's intimate, whether it's coworkers, supervisors, neighbors, the impairment, that the invalidation, neglectful, chronic stress of being in any kind of toxic, abusive, interpersonal relationship, the damage and the harm it does emotionally and physiologically. And so we're going to get into the nuances of that. I also want to stress and frame today's training with the importance, the significance of, as human beings, particularly children, but as human beings, we need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to be witnessed. We are social creatures. We need connection. We need to know we are lovable and worthy. And this alone, that bullet point alone, is in my opinion, the single most powerful health intervention that we as social service providers are targeting for. But just as human beings, we need to be seen, we need to be heard, and we need to see others. We need to see others as well. So it's intimacy and connecting. Which leads me to this general question that I also want to have you keep in your mind. What is the toll of a toxic relationship? Think about your personal life. Think about the lives that you have served, that you've worked with, worked for. And, we're going to get to the end about, compassion, forgiveness, but I really, there's been tons of studies about I think the U.S. Surgeon General put out their, document about the loneliness epidemic, which, while I completely agree, I think toxic bonding, toxic relationships, like I said, is the public health crisis of our lives currently. And so it's interesting that if you take out a toxic person in someone's life, that one piece, health health increases, health improves substantially, significantly. Impairment improves. And so again, I just want you to kind of have that in mind in your own personal life and again, the people we serve. And why is this topic important? Why is this issue imperative? Again, if you are in this training, you care. I would like to believe that you care. That is my assumption. And I think it is imperative, it's crucial that we must understand this concept of trauma bonding, toxic relating, to be able to assist in trauma recovery. And that looks very different for everybody. It's not a one size fits all, because we're serving children, we're serving victims, we're serving abusers. So it looks different. Okay. So abuse of power dynamics in children and adults. Again, I'm still trying to provide the framework for today. And again, I will encourage you after this. These topics are heavy. And so trauma brings up trauma. And throughout today and later on, if your personal symptoms start to appear, whether it's some re-experiencing, thinking about previous people you've worked with, or again, your own personal experiences, I encourage you to connect, be seen, be witnessed, kind of what I just mentioned in the first slide. Okay. So power is so crucial in the work of domestic violence and domestic abuse, family violence. And inversely, I push, I shouldn't say push, I promote empowerment in any opportunity I can. Safe empowerment, of course, but the people that are victims of abuse of power, again, we're talking about children right now, is again, I can't tell you the long-term impact. And like I said, we have an hour or two, but it is very, very detrimental to our health. So the power imbalance in child abuse is extreme, as a child is completely dependent on the caregiver for survival, love, and validation. This dependency for child abuse victims results in significant and long-term consequences, such as the development of betrayal blindness, cognitive dissonance, and ultimately trauma bonding. So we will be talking about betrayal blindness, cognitive dissonance today. Also, with adults, the power imbalance in abusive relationships, there's still a power imbalance, but the difference with adults in comparison to children is that adults have the capacity for more resources or support networks than a dependent child. And yes, I am very familiar that there are, with learned helplessness, I'm going to get into that. Sure, lack of resources are absolutely factual matters. However, in comparison to the child does not have the resources that an adult does. They just don't, whether it's pragmatic resources or even brain development. And so we're going to talk about different psychological defenses and the differences between children and adults. The dependency for adult abuse victims is created by emotional and psychological manipulation, resulting in, similarly, betrayal blindness, cognitive dissonance, learned helplessness, physiological familiarity, also known as addiction, and trauma bonding. And Miss Mia, would you be so kind, if someone has a question, you all please interrupt me. Please, in a perfect ideal world, we'd be doing this in person so we can have a conversation. open discussion when things pop up organically.
Totally. If anybody has a question throughout this webinar for Dr. Vanessa, just please put it in the Q&A so we can keep track of them. And I'll give a little
Please,
shout out to you.
yes, please. I don't want to feel as if I'm talking at you, because I can do it for a long time, but please, if anything comes up, please share. Okay, so trauma bonding and the intersectionality, and where it gets created. So early experiences of neglectful, chaotic, inconsistent, and abusive relationships, parental relationships, impact attachment and relational expectations, which results in equating of love and abuse. We've all heard slogans, love is not abuse. But it's, well, I'll get to that later. And if a child has these early experiences of neglectful, inconsistent, chaotic, abusive experience of relating, they begin to believe that a relationship is a place where a person is always having to work to maintain a partner's love and interest, which also looks like transactional relating. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, I hope that you all have at least one or two takeaways from today, that will help you have further compassionate interactions in the work that we do, and have these be reminders in the back of your head. So I am going to give you some information on attachment theory. This may be review for some of you. I'm not going to do a very deep dive in that. We are going to do somewhat of a deep dive in betrayal blindness and cognitive dissonance, and what these terms, they're psychological terms, they're fancy ways to explain what is really going on in these very difficult relationships that is very difficult for us to receive, understand, have compassion, work with, because we don't see these psychological processes that are occurring, but 100% they are. And betrayal blindness and cognitive dissonance they will explain what's going on psychologically. Intermittent reinforcement. So trauma bonding is intermittent reinforcement. I'm going to go into depth about the slot machine analogy. Again, all of these concepts can be very difficult to grasp at first. So I try to make it easy for people to understand. I love to use analogies and metaphors in therapy and in trainings. And so again, hopefully that can be another takeaway from today. We're also going to be going over the trauma bonded cycle. And there's about 8 characteristics that are occurring either one at a time or all simultaneously, believe it or not, that are happening in these trauma bonded toxic coupling relationships. And last but not least, we're going to wrap up with what radical acceptance is. So I want to emphasize that today is an understanding. I underlined it, understanding. Again, these are very difficult psychodynamic patterns that again are difficult to grasp, but so today is not focused on really what to do and how to manage it, how to intervene, how to interrupt patterns. This is it's not simple, but this is straightforward about understanding, so you guys have a better understanding of what these very nuanced, complicated, difficult relationships, styles of interrelating look like. All right. So I want to start off with attachment theory, attachment 101. So from cradle to grave, what that means is that we do not choose our style of relating. It is from the cradle. It is from our primary caregivers, and it is until grave, until we pass. With the caveat that just because of our early experiences in childhood, it say I have an anxious type or an avoidant type, that does not necessarily mean that I am destined to grave with that attachment style. However, if I want to change my attachment style of relating, I need to do work. I need to do a lot of work. They call it they call it an earned, secure base, earned, secure attachment style of relating. And what a secure attachment looks like, I'm not talking about that today because we're talking about trauma bonding, but very briefly, a secure attachment, a way of relating is it's flexible. It's, you know who to get close to, you know when to get close to them, you know how to get close to them, but you also know who to distance yourself from, when to distance yourself from somebody, how to distance yourself from somebody. So they're fluid, they're flexible. You can be close, you can be distant, you know how to get asked to get your needs met, you know how to support. And so that's the perfect ideal, right? But from my experience, we don't have perfect ideal childhoods and perfect ideal parenting. It requires, it's possible, but those that have a secure base, healthy relationships, it's work. It's work. So Bowlby was a medical doctor. He went to medical school, and then he went to psychoanalysis. And this was not too, I mean, a while back in the 30s, 1930s, so not too far back. But he was under the supervision of Melanie Klein, who's kind of one of the grandmothers of psychology with Freud and all of the grandparents. In any case, he was under her supervision, and his first child client was having a lot of rage, anger, just had a lot of symptomology. And remember, back in the day, at the time, it was all psychoanalysis. It was Freud. It was kind of about internal conflicts, repressed fantasies with parents. But Bowlby didn't have access to his minor clients' parents, and it infuriated him. And so that's how he developed attachment theory, really. He said, there has to be other ways of looking at children having symptoms. Again, whether it's sadness or anger, but just symptoms and impairment. And so, again, back in the 30s, the World Health Organization asked him to do a study on the orphaned children. And from that study, it pretty much confirmed his belief that children need attachment. Children need emotional connection. They need to be seen just as much, and I would argue, just as much as basic nutrition. And again, a long time ago, but not that long ago, all of the medical doctors were basically like, you're full of it, that doesn't make any sense. And so he still persevered, and he teamed up with the social worker, and they created a video And the video was about an orphan child. I think it was a boy. And again, showing symptoms of impairment. And he was in Bowlby and the social worker were hoping that they would get some traction, some buy-in about the importance of attachment, emotional closeness, and whatnot. And again, the medical community balked at them. And in fact, the video was, I think, was banned, or they wanted to ban it, and kind of all this controversy. And then lastly, what happened was that he was, I don't know if the strange one came first, but in any case, I think before Mary Ainsworth came and had the strange situation, this experiment that has now been multiplied by hundreds and thousands. I believe, I don't know if it was who, but in any case, they did allow him to provide care to orphan children. And sure enough, at the time, I'm sorry. In the 50s, at the time, here in the US, and I believe in maybe Canada, parents were only allowed to visit with their sick child 1 hour a week. And when all of this was happening with Bowlby, he said, let's bring parents in. Let's increase the time. And sure enough, guess what happened? The children started to get better because they were now having closeness with their parents. And that's when the strange experiment happened with Bowlby, which now leads me to these 3 types that had resulted in this experiment. I believe it was called the strange situation. I'm sorry, that is a very long backstory, but I really would like for you guys to understand this. Because if you understand the theoretical underpinnings of this type of work and attachment theory and the need, the necessity, and the requirement that children need, it is fundamental in this type of work of abuse and trauma and DV. So there's 3 types of attachment styles. I'm not, well, I did one side on all of them. So the anxious attachment. So what does that look like? Characteristics of an anxious attachment style. The children are overly clingy. They're anxious about their caregiver's ability and highly distressed when separated. They often seek constant reassurance and may be preoccupied with the relationship. So in the strange situation, what happened was they had a parent and a child, and they instructed the parent to leave, and the child became extremely anxious and at times aggressive. And so you look at the adult correlates. In adulthood, individuals exhibit high levels of dependency and insecurity in relationships, seeking frequent validation and becoming easily upset by perceived threats to their relationship. So if I'm an anxious type in an adult relationship, because I had an anxious environment for my primary caregivers, I may come off very jealous, very controlling, very possessive, very demanding, very insecure when I am in a relationship. Now, if I'm not in a relationship, I might come off very confident, very dependent, not insecure. But put me in a relationship, then all of my interpersonal childhood dynamics are going to be flaring up in that partnership. Similarly, there is another style that influences our style of relating, and that is the avoidant dismissive type. So the avoidant type in children, they appear indifferent to their caregiver's presence or absence. They will avoid or even reject close contact and appear self-sufficient. So the child's kind of aloof. They can, give or take if their parents there or not there. Oh, I see a hand. Is there a question? No? Okay.
I don't think so. Oh, it looks like
Sorry.
there's something in
Oh,
the.
I see
Oh, Karen said,
cameras.
would this apply in most relationships and not just intimate partner relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's to a degrees. It's to degrees, but say it's if I have a supervisor and I have an anxious style of relating, if my supervisor says, I don't know, has constructive criticism, you know, I might get really needy or clingy in the sense of, I'm talking about just work. I'm going to overcompensate. I'm going to be very anxious. I'm going to be very nervous. I'm going to be very um, hypervigilant, really. Um, or even if I'm close with a coworker, if I'm close with a coworker and then I see a friend or a coworker develop a relationship with another coworker, my anxious style might flare up. Um, so yeah, this is all obviously it's a lot more extreme when you have an intimate partner, but this can apply a lens to look at all styles of relating. So, but good question. Adult correlates. So individuals value independence, excuse me, to an extent that they avoid closeness or emotional intimacy, often find it difficult to rely on others or express vulnerability. And again, this is just obviously DV is on the more extreme side of the spectrum, but I had a couple sessions yesterday morning, and one partner is a classic anxious type, and the other partner is classic avoidant. And we talked about this topic about being seen and vulnerability and knowing how to connect. And the avoidant said, I don't, this is a completely different language. I mean, I would like to speak this language, but it's not. So for example, if I have an avoidant environment from my parents, I knew I was loved, I was taken care of, I had my basic needs met. But my parent or primary caregivers rarely, or if ever, checked in on my internal world. They never checked in on my internal world, which is intimacy. Intimacy isn't just romantic. There's intimacy between, parents and children. And so I may not have the lived, felt experience of what it looks like to emotionally connect and emotionally respond and emotionally be seen and emotionally see somebody. And so that's kind of the avoidant type, that it's like they're perfectly okay to have their partner in the home, but they don't necessarily need them on the couch all cuddled up. They're happy and content and satisfied with their partner tinkering around in the house. The anxious type is they need to be on the couch. If you go to the other room, where are you? I miss you. What are you doing? And it's because there's this big gaping hole or wound, and so they feel the need to fill it, fill it, fill it, fill it, fill it. And oftentimes it's never enough because they weren't given that love, attention, affection, validation in childhood. Or if they were seen, it was abusive. It was abusive. Okay. How do why is this? There you go. So there's another attachment called disorganized or fearful attachment. Likely, those that are in DV, toxic coupling, will have a disorganized attachment. Not always, but likely. So what does that look like in childhood? These are in children. Children show inconsistent, confused, and contradictory behaviors toward their caregiver. They mirror that really, because that's what they're receiving. They exhibit a mix of approach avoidance and resistance, reflecting confusion about the caregiver's responses. It is so confusing for a child to have a toxic, disorganized, fearful, ambivalent type of relating to the people that are supposed to care and love them the most. And so the consequence later in adulthood, these individuals have extreme difficulty managing emotions and relationships. And really, that's kind of key to life, how to manage our emotions safely and how to manage and navigating through relationships. So and the reason why there's just it's disorganized. There's no formal way of getting your needs met, to be seen, to be loved, to feel worthy, to feel lovable, all of that. And so it's mixed. They struggle with unresolved trauma and unpredictability in their relational patterns. So, what is a connection? And the vulnerability. The vulnerability. So anxious types have a heightened need for validation and reassurance. They perceive intermittent affection from an abuser as fulfilling their need for closeness and reassurance despite the underlying harm. So again, kind of like, think about this. I use a dry erase board, but like a big hole, just a big gaping hole inside. And so they need reassurance, validation. They need. I mean, the work is different on how to not feel empty. But that's not for today. But there's a significant heightened need for validation and reassurance that it impairs their relationships. Avoidant types, they minimize or dismiss the abuse, whether they're minimizing, dismissing the abuse that they're perpetrating or that they're receiving. Their tendency to avoid emotional closeness and vulnerability can lead them to stay in abusive relationships. Again, whether they're whichever end. So
Vanessa?
they avoid. Oh, yes.
Hi, sorry, we have a comment under the Q&A. It says, sounds like this would happen to children who were molested as well.
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
But yes, big fat yes. And honestly, I mean, these are fundamentals. Like I said, I'm starting from the bare bones with attachment theory. Whether I have been molested, had been exposed to domestic violence, have been a victim of domestic violence, I have a style of relating, attachment style of relating. That is a human Darwin being of evolution experience. But I'm going to get to that. So avoidant types. So basically, they avoid intimacy, they avoid closeness, they avoid, deny, repress the abuse rather than confront, rather than to address, because confronting, addressing requires competency to be able to tolerate self and tolerate others. And lastly, the disorganized. Disorganized struggle with, again, contradictory feelings. and responses, leading to a complex cyclical attachment of abusive patterns. Okay. So trauma bonding from the child's perspective. Now, trauma bonding in the child's perspective, this slide, it's under the assumption that there is abuse. Okay. And so this is what the experience is like for them, for us to understand and to kind of get in their mind. So trauma bonding is deeply confusing and painful. Remember, the child loves unconditionally. I'm going to explain why, but they love unconditionally their caregiver and seeks their approval despite the trauma and abuse they experience from them. Now, the child does not understand why their caregiver, who is supposed to provide a safe, secure attachment base, also hurts them. This leads to the child feeling feelings of guilt, shame, and fear. But again, they do not have, granted, just brain development. Aside from that, but they don't have awareness. They don't have understanding how we do. The emotional turmoil creates a powerful attachment that is so hard to break, even as it causes ongoing harm. And this powerful attachment is, in fact, the trauma bonding. The child's world is centered around pleasing the caregiver, avoiding conflict, and holding on to the hope that things will get better. Now, if you look, yes, this is a child's perspective, but if you look and think for a moment about the adult DV victim experience, it's the same sentence. It's the same sentence. That the victim's world is centered around pleasing, appeasing, getting the approval of their partner, avoiding conflict, and holding on to the hope that things will get better. And so if a child already has these ways of relating ingrained as the norm, it is no wonder how easy and how easily susceptible and vulnerable that a child can fall into these toxic abusive relationships. Okay, betrayal blindness. So betrayal blindness, there's tons and tons of research. Again, kind of I don't want to say newer, but handful of decades concept developed by Dr. Jennifer Fried. And this really came from sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. And so so what is betrayal blindness? Betrayal blindness, it is a psychological defense. Fancy way to say a coping strategy, coping mechanism, defense mechanism. It's a psychological defense where the child remains unaware or unacknowledged, right? Or they just unacknowledge it, but they remain unaware of betrayal by someone they depend on. Now, I would like to have opened this up to have this conversation about just this concept, what you guys think about it, why you think this develops. But it is such a simple term, complicated experience, but to explain the psychological protection that allows children to survive in abusive relationships or abusive environments, which leads to an adult being able to cope and manage in their abusive partnership or relationship. So betrayal blindness at easy said is the child is blinding, child or adult is blinding themselves to the betrayal because it's just too harmful. So why do children blind to betrayal trauma? By not fully acknowledging the betrayal, the child can continue to survive. And I am literally meaning survive. And our brain, again, fundamental, our brain was created, was born, the origin to survive, literally. So when you throw in attachment theory, throw in kind of the most extreme form of boundary violations, which is sexual molestation. And again, knowing that a child is required to be seen, a child has a deep internal conflict inside. And they don't, because a brain is meant to survive, this is not a conscious decision that a child develops this. It's a psychological defense that innately comes up to be able to still maintain and have that relationship with their caregiver intact. They need to blind themselves to the betrayal to survive. It allows a child to avoid the psychological pain. Again, children naturally believe that they are going to be loved by their parents or primary caregivers. And so to believe and experience the abuse, the pain, the trauma, they need to avoid it. Children also blind themselves to betrayal by their in childhood by their adult, and not just primary caregivers. It could be teachers. It could be anybody that they have some sort of dependency on, even if it's mild. They fear being rejected, abandoned, and losing caregivers' affection. It drives a child to deny and ignore the betrayal, because if they address it or see it, they fear that they're gonna not get affection, not be seen, rejected, all the core wounds that adults still struggle with. They also blind themselves. They blame themselves. They blame themselves, which then results in this internalization of guilt and shame. By blaming themselves, the child maintains the illusion that the caregiver is still a source of love and affection. And the other piece is that they fear of disrupting family dynamics. And whether this is a 5-year-old or 15-year-old, they don't want to disrupt the family. They don't, and think about Darwin, right? If you're survival of the fittest, if you're out left in the cold, chances are survival are slim to none. We need connection. We need intimacy. We need, support. And again, I want for you to, you can interchangeably put adult victims, fear of disrupting family dynamics, being rejected, being abandoned, having guilt and shame. It's all the same. Okay. So oh no. Okay. So with this concept, I want for you guys to see the relatedness. From a child and adult victim's perspective, betrayal blindness can manifest as a subconscious choice to not see or to not know the betrayal because acknowledging it would be too overwhelming and threatening for survival. Again, not only physical survival for a child, but emotional, mental, psychological survival. The child victim might focus on the moments when the caregiver for a child or partner for the adult is kind and loving, minimizing or ignoring the abuse. So it's selective awareness. That's what it's called. This allows the child or the adult victim to preserve a sense of safety and continuity in their life, even if it means enduring ongoing harm. And when I get into a little bit later about the characteristics of what trauma bonding looks like, it's you often hear that it's like at least I know, yes, I'm enduring harm, but at least I know what it is. I don't know what's out there. Fear of the unknown. So there's some familiarity. Children and adult victims with betrayal blindness struggle to make sense of their emotions, often feeling confused, guilty, ashamed, without fully ever truly, intrapsychically, psychologically, unless they're educated, understanding why. They develop coping strategies to help them survive the day-to-day reality, but that does lead to long-term emotional and psychological harm. Okay. Any questions so far before I move on to the next topic? Okay. So, cognitive dissonance. So what is cognitive dissonance? Again, another psychological concept. Theory was developed, or first developed, proposed in 1957 by Leon Festinger, and has since become a central concept in understanding human behavior, decision making, and attitude change. And so, not just related to DV. It's even with military. You know, I might have a very strong desire to protect my country, to be a patriot and protect my country and go to war and all of that jazz. But I also have a very, different experience, belief, feeling about harming people in combat. And so that's cognitive dissonance. But as it relates to domestic violence, trauma bonding, child abuse, it's such an important concept for you all to be equipped so you can also educate the people that we're serving. So cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept that refers to the discomfort or tension that arises when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, attitudes, or values. This discomfort often leads individuals to seek ways to reduce the dissonance, either by changing their beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors, or by rationalizing or justifying the inconsistency, which for the people that we serve, it's usually the latter, that we rationalize, justify, all these other characteristics of trauma. We trauma bond as a way to manage cognitive dissonance. So early experiences and chronic cognitive dissonance and their defenses has significant negative long-term consequences psychologically and physiologically. So again, think about attachment theory, think about betrayal blindness. I love my parent, but I don't like getting abused. I don't know how to reconcile that. I need my parent to survive, but I'm fearful. I mean, there's all these, I love them, I depend on them, but I can't stand them. And I'm scared like these. So how do you reconcile that as a child? Through cognitive dissonance. Okay. So cognitive dissonance in child abuse. So what does it look like? Again, in simple terms, cognitive dissonance is conflicting beliefs and psychological defenses. Those are the two big pieces to this. So what is a conflicting belief in child abuse? So there's one belief that I believe that my caregivers love me, that my parents love me, versus the experience of abuse, trauma that experience, the chaos, abuse, neglect. So children, as I mentioned, naturally believe that their caregivers are going to love and protect them. Versus, or meanwhile, at the same time, that belief 100%, over 100%, contradicts with their harsh reality of being harmed, neglected, and abused by their caregiver. Like, imagine that. The person that loves me doesn't care about me. And not only is neglectful, doesn't care about me, abuses me, instrumentalizes me, oh my goodness, use it as a objectify. They're supposed to love you, not objectify you. So how do you wrestle with that? The other conflicting belief is self-worth versus treatment. Children internalize their experiences, leading to conflicting beliefs about their self-worth. Again, my first slide, people need to know about themselves. I'm lovable. I'm worthy. They may believe they're good and deserve love, yet the abuse they experience suggests otherwise. And this creates a deep, deep, deep confusion and feelings of worthlessness. So what does a child do? What is a child to do? Deny, minimize. To resolve the cognitive dissonance, the child denies and minimizes the abuse. This allows for the child to maintain their belief that their caregivers do in fact love and protect them. What else do? They blame themselves. To reduce the cognitive dissonance, they blame themselves. If I were better behaved, this wouldn't have happened, is an example. This allows a child to maintain a positive view of the caregiver while taking on the responsibility of the abuse. Idealization of the abuser. Children will focus on the few, even minor, but few positive interactions they have with the abusive caregiver. This allows for the child to hold on to a belief that their caregiver is good. And again, if you look at these psychological defenses, these are profound. Not what they permeate. They're all over any adult DV relationship. I mean, this is psychological defenses for a child abuse victim. This is the same exact for an adult domestic violence victim. Denial, minimization, even domestic violence. I don't know about the self-blame. So long-term impact. Trust. Trust. Cognitive dissonance and psychological defenses lead to long-term trust issues, making it difficult for the child to form healthy relationships later in life. If you cannot trust the people that brought you into this world, or who are supposed to protect and provide a safe pathway into this world, and as you navigate through childhood, who can you trust? Internalized guilt and shame. Cognitive dissonance and self-blame psychological defenses result in deep internalized feelings of guilt and shame, impacting the child's self-esteem and mental health. And the other long-term impact is children will numb themselves, or disassociate. Disassociation is one of the most severe trauma responses in childhood and through adulthood. To cope with conflicting emotions. Again, the conflict, the dissonance. I think I thought they loved me, but they don't take care of me. And so it's so confusing, it's overwhelming, and it's scary. It's frightening. It's frightening. And so a lot of emotional numbing happens and a lot of disassociation happens because they don't, and which then later on in life leads to addiction, leads to substance use, substance abuse. It's really sad. So it affects their ability to process emotions safely and healthfully as they grow up. Okay. So what does this look like in abusive relationships? As the previous slide showed, you could argue that it could be the same slide as adult. But I do want to obviously show some differences, but I want to present it to you in this way so you see where these are very, very, very deep patterns of intrapsychic conflicts, ways of coping, ways of relating, ways of surviving. And so hence, if cognitive dissonance was a way to manage, way to cope in childhood due to abuse or neglect or instrumentalization, objectification by a primary caregiver, again, easily susceptible to use this psychological phenomena defense in adult relationships. So what is a conflicting belief in a DV relationship as an adult? Again, that love and abuse. The victim loves or is emotionally attached to the abuser. And this love 100% conflicts with the reality of being mistreated and abused. Huge conflicting, contradictory belief. Hope for change versus reality. The victim holds onto the belief that the abuser will change or return to the idealized version they once knew, even though the abuse continues. So again, I had these beautiful, wonderful courting, experiences, and we got along and had a good time and all of these. And so I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to hold on to that despite all of the abuse, harm, neglect, just toxic ways of relating. I'm still going to hold on to that hope. And this is cognitive dissonance. So how do I do that? What do I do with these two opposing conflicting beliefs with love and abuse, hope for change versus reality? I am going to rationalize and justify. To reduce cognitive dissonance, I might say or think or believe, oh, they're just stressed at work, or they're stressed because they don't have work, or it's all my fault. I shouldn't have. I know he gets mad at that. I know she doesn't like this. So I knew it. I provoked them. This allows to maintain attachment while minimizing the abuse. Denial and minimization, like child abuse, they deny and minimize the severity of the abuse. This allows them to stay in the relationship. Focusing on positive aspects, such as the abuser's moments of kindness, or in the honeymoon phase, when after a fight, we kiss, we make up, we go on a nice date or go on a trip, or whatever is my honeymoon, whatever that is the need for the victim. And so I'll focus on that. And I will have almost blinders to remind myself and others, but this happened and they apologize and they're going to, so on and so forth. This allows to reconcile my love for my partner who was abusive. And so again, these are the same types of defenses. They're just a little bit more, a little difference, but at the crux of it, it's the same that happens in child abuse. Long-term impact, erosion of self-esteem. So if I'm using continuous psychological defenses to ward off this cognitive dissonance, to deal with these conflicting beliefs, I may begin to believe that I actually deserve the abuse, and that I'm simply not worthy of better treatment because I never had it. And I don't even know what it looks like. I don't even think it's possible. I don't even think it's I feel hopeless. Emotional psychological damage. The ongoing cycle of abuse and cognitive dissonance leads to anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Okay. So we went over betrayal, blindness, cognitive dissonance, and now let's talk about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is a repeated cycle or pattern in a relationship whereby a person remains bonded, characterized by manipulation, invalidation, emotional, and other forms of abuse. The trauma bond is perpetuated via intermittent reinforcement through rewards and punishments. So, people often mistake Stockholm syndrome as trauma bonding. That's a whole nother topic, but the main difference, they're not the same. The main difference is Stockholm syndrome is both. That came up with, I fell in love or became emotionally attached to my kidnapper. I'm held hostage. I become attached, they say trauma bonded with the person that kidnapped me. But with Stockholm syndrome, that kidnapper too develops an emotional bond, attachment, connection with his or her hostage. So it goes both ways. Trauma bonding is unilateral, meaning it goes from one to the other. I want to make sure you guys understand that difference. So I say slot machine. Why? I would love to again be in person. No judgment on people that like to gamble or do slot machines, but slot machine is an easy way to understand what trauma bonding is, which is intermittent reinforcement. So why don't people walk away from slot machines? Sunk cost fallacy versus the jackpot. Well, let me do this. Let me explain this first, and then. So I want to explain trauma bonding with this idea of a slot machine analogy to heighten your understanding of intermittent reinforcement. So in a slot machine, think about it. Why do people keep going back to or play slots or keep going back to a slot machine or can't get away from a slot machine? Excuse me. um, you don't win every time. You do, but you don't win every time. And similarly, with trauma bonding, you don't receive the love and affection every time. And I'm going to get into the science behind it right now. In slot machines, there's unpredictability and compulsion. In a slot machine, there's random winnings. And the person at the machine, they are hopeful it could happen on the next spin. Similarly, in trauma bonding DV relationships, these relationships are unpredictable. And the victim is always hopeful for the next good moment. But it's unpredictable. It's compulsive because it happens. It does happen. But it's unpredictable. And so you're always hopeful. Similar with the slot machine. When's my next one? I'm hoping to win on my next one. Sunk cost fallacy or fallacy. This is actually I think it came from engineer. Doesn't matter where the concept came from, but sunk cost fallacy, when you think about that term with the idea of a slot machine and gambling, it's this thought that I've already spent so much money. I can't stop now. I am due for a win. You know, if you're playing, losing, but you're so far in, you just it's sunk cost. Like I might as well just go all in. I might as well just take it to the wheels fall off, because you invested so much. And similarly, in a trauma bonded toxic DV relationship, it's the same belief. I've already invested so much time into this relationship. I cannot leave now. And what if, right? The unpredictability. What if just around the corner it gets better? What if? Emotional highs and lows. If anybody gambles, it is a roller coaster. In a slot machine, you are experiencing disappointment with losses, and you're also experiencing excitement with wins. You're experiencing the thrill of anticipation and euphoria of winning. And these are these emotional highs and lows and roller coasters. And you go to a casino, go to one of the tables, you see people scream, it has physiological responses that are happy, not only in the brain, but in the physical body. And it's addictive. And so the emotional highs and lows, with the slot machine analogy, with trauma bonding and a domestic violence relationship, it's the same. You're experiencing emotional pain, like the depths of hell pain, following by temporary relief. And in hopeful cases, joy when the abuser is kind or apologetic. And so this emotional highs and lows, even if it's a smile, even if it's any kind of minor affection, it's going to put the trauma bonded DV adult in this almost euphoria. And the last is this illusion of control. In a slot machine, a person believes that they have control over the outcome. They think they can influence the next spin. You've seen people do, I don't know, they go to the same machine or they go to the same dealer, that they have some sort of control or influence, and that I'm due for a next win. I'm due. It's my time. I've been here a long time. I deserve it. I'm due for it. Well, same thing. In a trauma bonded DV relationship, there's a belief that you can change the abuser's behavior, or abuser change the victim's behavior, um, by being more understanding, by being more loving, by being more compliant, by going to therapy, by a litany, endless litany of things. And they believe that they can, quote unquote, fix the relationship, fix their partner, or earn the abuser's affection. And that keeps them trapped. Like I can earn it. Again, this transactional, back to attachment. I need to do something to be deserving of love. I need to be doing something, performing, over functioning to be seen by my caregivers. And so I'm going to earn this, my partner to not abuse me anymore. And all of this stuff is extremely addictive. It's addictive. Not hating on gambling, by the way. Not mean to offend. Okay. The trauma bonding cycle. So the cycle is a form, the trauma bonding cycle is a form of emotional and psychological manipulation where the abuser gains control by alternating between intense affection and cruel mistreatment. This is the intermittent reinforcement. So I'm going to love you, love you, love you, hate you, hate you, hate you. This often leaves the victim confused, dependent, trapped, and trauma bonded. So what does this trauma bonding cycle look like? This is similar to or adjacent to the narcissistic cycle of abuse. And there are other phases, but these are the big ones. I'm sure all of you are already familiar with the honeymoon, tension building, acute explosion, honeymoon, all of that. This is just a different conceptualization of a trauma bonding cycle. So the idealization phase. This is, if you have not heard this concept or term, love bombing, aka honeymoon. Okay, these are all same concepts-ish, same family. So idealization, what does it look like? It's intense affection and admiration, creating a perfect image, winning trust and dependency. And the idealization, I really want for you to be able to really sit in that phase through the lens of DV and family violence, whether it's a child, the victim, or even the abuser. Idealization is so powerful. And what happens in this phase is that it gives people a second chance at a corrective experience of being unconditionally loved and idealized by their primary caregivers. And so this idealization, really, if you want to get a little wooey, because I love to, it is, think of it as the experience of a maternal love and comfort, that a maternal gift, beautiful, divine gift that, oh my, I love you, you're perfect, you're amazing, you're what a mother, how a maternal love showers on their baby. And so if I never got that in my life and I meet somebody who is idealizing me and love bombing, but just idealizing me, loving on me, paying attention to me, taking care of me, saying I'm the most beautiful, smart, like just complimenting me and desiring me and admiring me. How can you not fall for that? How can you not fall for that? We know healthy relationships are a slow burn. Um, in trauma bonded DV relationships, if you look back, it is a quick fire, it's not a slow burn. It is fire. It is fire. It's passion. It's excitement. It's like two little kids frolicking in the meadow. It's addictive. And so I really would like for you guys to remember when we look at DV and supporting and safety planning and all of that. Yes, I know danger assessment, lethal. I get all of that. But to kind of sit in and slow down on the idealization that the victim and child experienced. It was real for them. And that's why it is so hard to let go, because then who else is going to see them like that? Or I shouldn't say who else is going to see them like that. They just don't want to let go of that experience. And it's hard. It's really hard to let go of that experience. So if you focus on all the negative and all this danger, they don't go there because of cognitive dissonance, because betrayal blindness, and they go to this idealization. They sit in it, whether they're consciously aware of it, likely not. And this is part of psych ed. Okay. So the second part of the cycle is devalue. Devaluing is gradual or sudden change. It includes criticism, blame, emotional manipulation. There is a why. There is a why an abuser idealizes and devalues. That is not for today, because that is a very deep psychodynamic process that occurs, which that is my jam. I love educating on that. But I'm not going to explain the whys. I'm just having you understand the cycle. So this idealization, they begin to devalue, and then they discard. And the discard can be abrupt or gradual, but it's this disengagement, it's this coldness, it's this aloofness, it's this detachment, and kind of moving on. But then Hoover happens. And hoovering, think of it like a vacuum. It's any attempt to suck them back in. And again, this isn't just abusers. These are parents. These are anybody that have been abusive. So they attempt to re-engage. There's false promises and apologies, and then the cycle repeats. And so these emotional highs and lows create a trauma bond, which is an intense, powerful attachment to the abuser. So they're always waiting for the next idealization experience from them. And it does come. It does come. Okay. So just a short, some information on the science. I love the science too. So what is the science behind trauma bonding? There is a science, and it is a physiological dependence. The body and the brain become physically and chemically dependent on the cyclical patterns of abuse and affection within an abusive relationship. So abuse and affection, again, intermittent reinforcement, slot machine. Our body becomes, why do you think there's so many people addicted to gambling? So what's happening? What's happening in the brain? What's happening in the body? What's the science behind trauma bonding? The stress response and cortisol. So there is a significant impact on the body. When the stress response is activated, elevated cortisol cortisol starts spewing out the body, which is a stress hormone. And when there's elevated cortisol, it has dire impact on the body and brain. So when cortisol gets released too much, it leads to anxiety, it leads to insomnia, it leads to digestive gut problems, weakened immune function, and even heart disease. The devaluing, oh wait, that shouldn't be there right there. Sorry about that. Chronic stress activation. Again, the frequent release of cortisol, that stress hormone, it's just not good. Dopamine and reward system. Intermittent reinforcement. Positive reinforcement happens during the idealization and Hoover phases, right? It's dopamine. It's a dopamine hit. Followed by negative experiences during devaluation and discard phase. This is highly addictive. This is the chase. So what happens with the dopamine release is that when the abuser apologizes or offers affection, attention, admiration, the victim's brain and child releases dopamine, and this dopamine is a neurotransmitter for pleasure, for reward. It's almost like when you eat a cheeseburger, or I don't know, candy or whatever your vices. It's you get dopamine, you get a hit, and you are chasing it. The fight, flight, freeze response, hypervigilance. Again, the intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictability keeps the victim in constant and activates the hyperarousal state. This creates the physiological dependence where the victim feels unable to function outside of the stressful environment. And so it's so interesting and fascinating, when whether it's a child or an adult, when you take them out of a toxic environment, toxic relationship, yes, research shows that they get symptoms, impairment improve, but it's this initial transition shock that becomes overwhelming and unsafe and uncomfortable, and kind of the common safety is so unfamiliar, so foreign. They're used to living in this chronic state of hypervigilance, this flight or flight, the cortisol release, the dopamine chase. Like they're used to a lot going on inside. So you say they start dating, or say they're in a healthy, safe, stable family family system. Or you try to introduce mindfulness or meditation. People need to be very cautious on that transition. Okay. Oxytocin and attachment. So oxytocin is the love hormone. It gets released during moments of intimacy, during moments of affection, and this reinforces emotional attachment despite the abuse. So when the honeymoon phase happens, when the apologies happen, when the idealization happens, when the hoovering happens, when a bonding chemical gets released, reinforcing the attachment to the abuser. So we're wired. We're neuropsychologically, psychologically, emotionally, we're wired. All right, we're good on time. So I want to, any questions so far? Nope. Okay. Okay. So now that we have kind of a psychological understanding of what is happening that we can't see, these processes where we physically cannot see, I want now to share with you what it looks like in terms of what you can see. So, there are 8 characteristics that describe what a trauma bonded relationship looks like. So, red flags. Let's say eight red flags to look out for. Justification. This is the litany, again, laundry list of why they didn't mean it. A rationalization of their manipulative behaviors. This pattern is so reflective. You don't even think about it. It's a manifestation of cognitive dissonance. So it would look something like, I know they're being mean to me. I know this is wrong. I know this is bad. I know this isn't healthy. But, they're just going through it. They had a hard childhood. He or she has mental health issues. They have substance abuse. I mean, it's just a laundry list to justify and create these cognitive dissonance coping strategies. And again, this, as hopefully you now know, begins early in childhood as a very useful, quick tool to use. It's almost a bit like a bad habit. Future faking. So this is the many promises of faking of the future. So, when we get married, I promise to get married, or when we get married. This is promises of having children or when we have children. It's the promises of going to counseling, getting a better job after we move. It's always when this happens in the future. And so when the victim partner starts to begin to make moves to leave or change the relationship style of relating, then the partner, I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to get sober. I'm going to work on myself. It just spews out. Unfortunately, it doesn't ever happen in a substantial way anyway. In a substantial way. So the future faking becomes a branch to hold on to and to pin those justifications on. Note, you will even share your future fakes with friends, family, coworkers. The trauma bonded person lives in hope, but never in reality. They live in the hope for the future, that this is going to come back, that we're going to do this. It's always in hope of the future, but it's fake. Hence future faking. Repetition compulsions. This is the same fight over and over and over again about the in-laws, about finances, about parenting, about many things, but with no resolutions. It's the same fight every holiday season or birthday or vacation or trip. This is indicative of a lack of empathy from the abusive partner, and their challenge of growth and progress and evolving. And it's, again, this caught in the cycle of hope. And, well, okay, wrap up. So mystical, magical thinking. People point out, myself included, how unhealthy the relationship is. Even when you point out to them. And maybe ask why are you guys together? What keeps you together? Why do you love their partner? The person cannot give clear, healthy reasons for staying in the relationship. That is a red flag. And you'll hear kind of these vague responses. I don't know. He's just my person. She's just my person. We just get each other, and no one gets us. And we just, And so it's like this, again, just vague reference of what do you love about your partner? What, like, kind of just basic, what characteristics, what attributes, why do you love your partner? Why do you want to be with your partner? What do you admire? What do you adore? What do you know? And again, I don't know. Nobody understands it. It's just it's quite interesting. If they cannot delineate and specifically identify that partner's characteristics and attributes and traits, that is a red flag, and vice versa. Because relationships, healthy relationships, ought to be grounded in respect, kindness, compassion, mutuality, reciprocity, empathy, and growth. Fear of leaving. Even when the person gets closer to recognizing this isn't healthy, this is abusive, this is bad, this is da da da, the fear overwhelms the person with self-doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if I am crazy? What if nobody is going to love me? What if they're right? Who's going to want me? What that I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Just self-doubt. There's lack of identity. Who am I without this person? How can I even live without this person? This is all I know. I've been with this person since I was a teenager. Fear of loss. What if the next person gets the better version of them? I hear that all the time. I put in all this hard work. What if they change after me? What if they change for the next person? What if I'm alone forever? What if I'm not lovable? What if I can't be in a relationship? What if nobody wants me? It's as good as it gets. Fear of rejection and judgment. What are people going to think of me? Being divorced, being separated with children, or again, being separated again with more children with different fathers, different mothers. You know, what just judgment. After so many years of being confused, and cognitive dissonance, justification, rationalization, minimization, all of that, trauma bond and toxic relationships are almost a form of indoctrination, almost like a cult, generating a fear out there, the fear of the great unknown. And so when I do education on just the basic power and control, when we talk about isolation, I use an analogy of a cult. One of the big hallmarks, or one of the hallmark of a cult is isolation, and creating fear out there. And so in a DV relationship, the cult is their partner, that they're the God and the end all be all, the omniscient, omnipotent, that it's their own cult. but it's same analogy and same fear that happens. Okay, one-stop shop. You're the best friend. Another red flag. You're the best friend, you're the cheerleader, you're the personal assistant, you're the therapist, you're the chef, you're the financial planner, you're the housekeeper. Your role shifts daily. But when they're not interested in you, they don't want to be bothered. So they want to use, take, receive. But if you're not useful to them, they say bye. So the experience, if you believe if you do enough for them, that they will be happy and they'll see you and they'll love you and you'll get that dopamine hit. But they will never be happy, not because of your lacking or anything, but because they're not capable. And the last two characteristics is hiding your feelings and needs. You can't feel or share your needs and vulnerabilities, and you're hiding your needs and feelings have become a pattern. This is not about survival. This reflects self-devaluation and a fear of upsetting the toxic person. This, we all know this experience of walking on eggshells, hiding your feelings and needs keeps the illusion that the relationship alive. And so if you don't feel safe to share your feelings, to share your needs, um, you're yes, you're walking on eggshells, you're living this hyper aroused, hyper vigilant, fight or flies, freeze response state, but you're devaluing yourself. You're devaluing your worth, that your needs and your feelings are not important. And absolutely they are important. And so in that experience, if you did not get that in childhood, it is a different um it's a different battle. It's a battle worth worth going to fight for yourself, for your value, for your self-worth, um for yourself. It's a battle worth fighting. Rationalizing relationship to other people. Again, another cognitive dissonance, psychological defense. You're hiding patterns to others. You don't share what's really happening. You're aware of what's happening. You're a smart person. Even children, they could be very much aware of what's going on. So you get in the you get caught in the cycle of defending it to yourself and to the world at large, much like a child growing up in an emotionally abusive, chaotic, and validating familial relationship. The shame from being from an unhappy family is overwhelming. And therefore you learn to be vague about speaking about unhealthy relationships, let alone abuse. Okay. So just oh, I didn't put P. That's interesting. Okay. So what to do with trauma bonded relationships? Step one, and there's a lot of steps, but as I mentioned earlier in today, we're not talking about the how-tos. It's just kind of getting an understanding of what trauma bonding is in the brain, in the body, psychologically, what it looks like, the red flags to look out for. And so this idea of radical acceptance, and what radical acceptance is, it is what it sounds like. You have to accept, and it's so radical to accept that your parent, your lover, your partner is abusive, and it's not going to change no matter how much minimizing, justifying, overcompensating, denial. Like it is out of your control. It is out of your control. And so accepting that is a hard pill to swallow. It sucks, and it sucks. I don't know how else to say it. But being intentional about reminding yourself that it is not your fault. And although you begin to accept that the behavior is not your fault or anything of lacking, it's still going to hurt. You're still human. You're still human. The other thing that must be radically accepted is the realization. Remember the slot machine? There is no jackpot. There is no jackpot. There is a loss. And so you're waiting for something that is out of your control to fix or earn. And what happens is when you radically accept that you are in a trauma bonded relationship, that you've experienced abuse as a child, experienced or have been in an abusive relationship, there is a long, dark corridor of grief. And it's sad. There is such amount of loss that occurs. I've had clients over the years that way they were in a trauma bonded relationship with their partner, and years later they're moved on to new relationships, new families, new life, but they still continue to struggle with bouts of grief, bouts of sadness, of loss of time, loss of themselves, loss of a future, like loss. And there is a diagnosable, in the DSM, prolonged grief disorder. It's for physical loss, but I would argue it's the same symptomology in these kinds of narcissistic, domestic violence, abusive relationships that occur. It's a prolonged grief that happens. I think prolonged is longer than a year. And you think about it, and you don't end the relationship and then it's all good and you move on. Okay. And deep, it's a quick, I didn't come up with this concept, Dr. Romani did. Deep is a quick tactic, kind of like gray rock. Deep is what one can do when they are in a trauma bonded relationship, and it's you don't defend, you don't explain, you don't engage, and it should say personalize. You don't personalize. So simple example is if I'm in an abusive, trauma bonded, narcissistic relationship and they say, you didn't take out the trash or you didn't do this or whatever, and I know I take out the trash every single day and they're trying to gaslight me, I don't defend myself. I don't explain myself. I don't engage in that combat, and I don't personalize. Gray rock is another tactic. And ultimately, the ideal is, to exit trauma bonded relationships. And yeah, you are a victim, or one is a victim of toxic bonding, toxic relating, abuse, and you're victimized. But the goal is to move through and become a survivor. And then in a perfect world, you grow from it. You thrive. And it is possible. It is I had my own, trauma, and as I'm sure everybody has in this training right now. And so it is such a powerful, empowering experience to go from victim to survivor to thriver. And the last piece is about forgiveness. And what the definition of forgiveness is to cease to feel resentment toward an offender. Now, forgiveness is not a one size fits all, and it is a divine gift to forgive self and others. It is a gift, but I will say that research and studies have shown that if you keep forgiving someone who reoffends, it creates psychological harm. And so forgiveness in itself is not a marker or a bench marker or benchmark to aspire to in this kind of healing process, survivor thriving journey. Just like hope in itself is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful strength and testament of resilience to give, to have. But if you are giving hope or forgiveness to someone who is exploiting it, taking advantage of it, not reciprocating it, it does psychological damage and psychological harm to you. And so really, this idea and concept of forgiveness and compassion is about self. You want to forgive yourself for Well, I mean, because the process is, as you know, there's a lot of internalization of self-blame and guilt, and I should have done this and I could have done that better, that you just don't feel worthy. Um, and to forgive yourself that it is not your fault for wanting to be seen, wanting to be loved, wanting to give love, wanting to see somebody, wanting to help somebody. Um, and then to have some compassion, a lot of compassion for yourself. Okay, and that concludes for today, everybody. So, thank you for listening. I left my email and my website if you want to get in contact with me. Um, I have a um, mental health clinic in South Bay with therapists, and that is our mission, to help and heal anybody impacted by trauma, abuse, and to heal and educate